A George Orwell's 1984 was originally published in 1949. It's one of those great novels that nearly everyone's read or is at least familiar with. It's renowned due to the scope of its impact on culture, and because of its tremendous influence on much of the subsequent speculative fiction that followed it. The novel depicts an ultra-totalitarian regime ruled by the omnipresent party. Readers follow protagonist Winston Smith, a character who is dissatisfied with a life that hardly seems worth living. He's in conflict with himself, with the prevailing mental state of his society, and from the outset, despite his sometimes questionable moral character, we fervently hope that he'll find a way out. We cheer for him, hoping that he can overcome the insurmountable and avoid the inevitable. Living in a terrifying surveillance society, Winston attempts a humble rebellion as he resists the orthodoxy espoused by Big Brother and the inner party. The book was written 75 years ago as a chilling warning about the future, yet we continue to turn to it to make sense of our current reality. When it comes to sorting out our reactions to political policy or issues of privacy, we establish how extreme the situation is by how much it seems to approach 1984. When it's said that some aspect of life is Orwellian, it's this book in particular, and not Orwell's entire oeuvre, that's being referenced. We might use Dickensian to describe a setting, or Kafkaesque to describe a tone, but when we use the adjective Orwellian, we're most often describing something not from another work of fiction, but from our real life in the present. Something ominous, corrupt, or sinister. Something that threatens truth, honesty, and freedom of thought. 1984 is the story of a most severe and terrifying form of tyranny and one man's attempt to resist it. It's about power and love, authority and individuality, and the fragile but vital fight for freedom. It gets a lot of credit for its cultural impact, but it's also a heck of a good read. Part political thriller, part romance, part horror story. It also happens to be one of my all-time favorite novels.
The first time I read 1984, it was as a student from this Penguin pocketbook edition, with a drawing of a building towering above a cityscape. There's a helicopter with searchlight and a massive poster of Big Brother on the side of the building. I've always liked the textured collage style of this cover image, but when my original copy fell apart, I replaced it with the updated Penguin cover, which now has a bit more Soviet-era styling and a single eye staring out from the surrounding darkness. Over the years, I've read some biographical texts about the author and some critical material about his work. I've checked out some contemporary takes on the narrative. Here's a graphic novel edition that's quite good. However, I continue to return to the primary text itself, and I wanted to see what the Folio Society version had to offer in terms of an upgrade. So, let's do this. Hey, double Orwell. We'll check them out one at a time. Here's the first release of 1984 from the Folio Society. It came out in 2001 as part of the Complete Novels of George Orwell, a box set of 5 volumes. As the most desired selection from the set, it was then made available as a single release the following year, and from 2002 to 2007, it saw 5 printings. The single release is presented in a plain gray paper-covered slipcase with a curved open edge. On the front cover, there's an impressionistic image of a city street in khaki yellow and green colors, with a black and white horizontal panel of a man's eyes. The contrast between the tight detail of the inset and the soft detail of the background is carried over to the backboard, where we get another urban space in the same color palette with a second inset image of an eye, this time with vertical positioning. This design matches the other 4 volumes from the boxed set. The cover is wrapped in cambric grained material, a paper with a plasticized feel. On the spine, the title is spelled out and debossed in a copper-colored foil, with the publisher name at the bottom. The binding is finished with black bands. When we open the novel, we're met by speckled gray-brown end papers and a medium-weight stock. In the box set release, it's a bit different, with gray-green end papers. The first printing from the box set employs St. Paul's wove paper, while this third printing single release uses Caxton wove. In terms of thickness and quality, they're essentially the same, and both come across as smooth due to the fine wire mesh used in their production, though the St. Paul's Wove has a warmer cream color compared to the Caxton paper, and the text is darker and crisper in this standalone version. There is no introduction in this book. Each of the novel's 3 parts is signaled with this plain page, and each chapter begins immediately after the previous one ends, with little to signal the chapter break beyond a small Roman numeral. The interior artwork, like the cover, is by Stephen Devine. Like all the other books from the box set, it's black and white charcoal illustrations with an emphasis on portraits. The artwork here is presented on the same paper as the text block, and the images all land right next to their corresponding passages from the text, which is the best way to do it. Let's take a detailed look at the artwork now. The first illustration happens to depict a scene from near the end of the novel, as protagonist Winston Smith is reconditioned to be reintegrated into society. He's in the Ministry of Love. A heavy apparatus is placed on his head with clamps at his temples, and it produces a flash of white light which results in a patch of emptiness in his mind. This image gives us a good preview of what we'll see from the art in this edition, a grittiness with psychological elements and figures often lit from below. The second illustration is of Winston Smith in his work coveralls. He gulps down some Victory gin from a teacup to help him find the courage for the thing he's about to do. He's near his apartment window in Victory Mansions, overlooking London. The dark buildings of the city look foreboding and ominous, especially against the pyramid of the Ministry of Truth which is dominating the skyline. This moment is from the opening chapter, and the thing Winston is about to do is write in his journal for the very first time, a defiant act that he knows will both seal his fate and lead to his doom. The third image is of the low-ceilinged canteen in the Ministry of Truth. After finishing his lunch and sipping his Victory coffee, Winston notices this dark-haired girl looking at him. She'd been listening to her bespectacled companion quack on about Ingsoc, but her attention momentarily fell to Winston. He'd previously noted her watching him during the 2-minute hate. Here his paranoia takes over. Is she a member of the Thought Police or a spy? Winston concentrates on holding his face in the calm, neutral expression that helps one avoid detection. I do wonder about this clock. In the world of the novel, 12-hour faced clocks are very rare and considered antiques, so I don't imagine they'd actually use them in the party's ministerial buildings. It's a bit of a questionable choice in the artwork. The fourth illustration is of Winston examining the picture in the room above Mr. Carrington's antique shop. The proprietor holds a lamp so that they can see the engraving in its frame. It's of St. Clement's Dane Church, and this is where Winston first hears the snippet of the children's song about London churches. The artwork here gets a little too muddy for me, as I can't fully distinguish the forms from their shadows. The next illustration is from Winston and Julia's time together in the room above the antique shop. This secret location affords them greater privacy, as they enjoy the large old-time bed and the temporary sense of security from the intimacy that they're able to share. This sensual image is well balanced, with minimal line work and detail for the bedsheets, and careful detail for the figures. There's great value control here, and the composition draws the eye to their embrace, which had previously been described as a battle and a victory against the party, as a political act. The sixth image depicts Winston as he finally returns to the room above the antique shop after a sudden pivot in political alliance has led to those working in the Ministry of Truth to have to work more than 90 hours in a 5-day week. Winston's been looking forward to reading the book, which was passed along to him before the rush at work, and here he can finally sit in an armchair and begin to read. The heavy shadow on Winston's face is cast by the book itself, which feels symbolic. The seventh image is from the scene where Winston and Julia are apprehended. Winston looks down with his hands above his head. From my reading of the text, he should be naked here, feeling vulnerable. He looks down and tries to hold still to avoid being hit, as the officer with a smooth prizefighter's jowl numbly looks on. This guy feels a bit too much like a cop to me. I'm not wild about that big heavy cast shadow from his elbow on this one either. This is probably my least favorite of the bunch. The eighth and final image is from the very end of the novel. Winston is in the Chestnut Tree Cafe, awaiting a news bulletin with an update from the African front. He holds his hands nervously to his mouth as he anticipates the news, while behind him a torn "Big Brother is watching you" poster can be seen. This piece is different from the others. It's not a high angle or low angle composition. Rather, it's straight on with a tight focus, which is perfect for this particular scene, as Winston is no longer the same man from earlier in the novel. The close proximity of the figure lends some intimacy between viewer and character that's not present in the other images, but does appear to parallel the eyes from the front and back cover. Now let's take a look at the second 1984 from the Folio Society. This version was released in 2014. It's presented in a blue paper-covered slipcase with the title and a reproduction of the author's signature printed on one side. This slipcase has a straight open edge. The cover has a faint image of Big Brother staring out from the front of the book, and as we'll see once we get into the interior art, it kind of haunts the rest of the artwork. The book is bound in cloth. The spine features the author's name, the spelled title, and the publisher name, all printed in white, while the numerical title runs vertical and is blocked in red. The binding is appropriately finished with red head and tail bands. When we open this copy, we're met by blue end papers in a medium lightweight stock. This book is printed on Abbey wove paper, Folio's current standard stock for the text block, which is smooth, acid-free, and comes in at a cool white color. The three parts of the novel are again signaled by simple pages, though the number is spelled this time, and the font choice is more distinct in this edition. The new chapters still roll over directly from the previous chapters, but this bold bar and standard numerical presentation help set them off from the rest of the text. If we compare the two editions side by side, we can see that the 2014 edition is a bit bigger, with an extra centimeter in both the height and the width. The text is larger in the 2001 version, which some might prefer. It also features slightly warmer white paper, however both editions boast generous margins and provide great contrast, enhancing the reading experience. The 2014 edition features a brief biography of the contributors, which I always appreciate. The introduction is by Alan Rusbridger. He's an author and an editor, most notably for The Guardian and Prospect magazine. In this excellent 8-page introduction, Rusbridger pulls from his time as editor-in-chief at The Guardian and alludes to their role in the Edward Snowden global surveillance leaks. Rusbridger considers how Orwell's 1984 was often used as a gauge at that time and helped people make sense of the Snowden leaks in terms of determining just how Orwellian they were. He finishes by reminding the reader that in these modern times, we are all potentially Winston Smith. The interior artwork, like the cover, is by Jonathan Burton. He's familiar to Folio fans for his work on the Faraway Tree books, the Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy series, and the Game of Thrones books. The artwork here is presented on a thicker stock textured paper, and the images all land within 20 pages of the text they correspond to. Let's take a detailed look at that artwork now. The first illustration, the frontispiece opposite to the title page, features Winston in his blue coveralls looking down at the city below him from his apartment window. This ingsoc sign flapping in the wind reveals a great attention to the textual detail on the part of the artist. The description notes the desaturated look of London, pointing out that the only touch of intense color comes from the Big Brother is watching you posters, which stare out from the buildings across the way. Again, the Ministry of Truth dominates the skyline, but it's rendered in greater detail here, right down to the terraced floors and the three-party slogans visible on its face. The second illustration is of Winston's neighbors, the Parsons family. Inside their dingy apartment, we can see the dirty dishes, the worn floor, and the massive Big Brother is watching poster. After Winston helps unclog the kitchen sink, he's pelted by the boy, who shoots him in the back of the neck with his slingshot. The boy, dressed in the uniform of the spies, bellows at Winston, calling him a traitor. Mrs. Parson has to hold him back, and Winston notes the look of helpless fright on the woman's grayish face, as the daughter looks on in scorn, and Winston thinks about the terror the parents must live under due to their horrid children. The third image depicts Winston Smith sitting in his work cubicle within the Ministry of Truth. Again, the attention to the textual detail here is fantastic. You can make out the speakwrite, the small pneumatic tube for messages, the larger one to his left for newspapers. and the memory hole for waste paper. Winston cautiously looks over his shoulder as he contemplates how to deal with a secret message that's been passed along to him. The gray-green colors and the streaky texture create a dingy, dusty feel, and the poster of Big Brother maintains a motif across these illustrations. He really is always watching. The fourth image depicts Winston and Julia in a hiding place that she knows. It's a small natural clearing screened by a ring of ash saplings. Here are the bluebells Winston's picked for her that have fallen to the side, and her discarded clothing. Winston falls to his knees before her, takes her hand, and looks her in the eye, and notes her bold smile. The natural setting and the colors, along with the nude form, suggest a sort of paradise, and of course it's notable that this is the first illustration in the book without the Big Brother poster visible. The next illustration is of the new poster that's appeared all over London in the lead-up to Hate Week. It depicted an expressionless Eurasian soldier in enormous boots, and was so contrived that it always appeared that the gun was pointed at the viewer. Along with the flags and banners, which feature some wonderful lighting and texture effects, we can feel the frenzy of patriotism that's gripped London at this point in the narrative. And hey, look who's back! The sixth image is of inner party member O'Brien at his desk, studying a slip of paper as Julia and Winston are ushered into his home office. On the telescreen behind him, the little flash of the INSOC banner is a nice echo back to the previous illustration. Other details, like the mass of papers and the speakwrite, even the green-shaded lamp, are all accurate to the text. I'm not sure about the vertical streaks here. They worked well in the previous image of Winston at work, but the grimy, gritty texture doesn't feel quite right for O'Brien's home, which is described as luxurious and immaculate. What I do like is the sense of quiet power that the composition conveys. The slumped shoulders and lower positioning of the figures in the foreground makes them feel slight next to the strength suggested by the positioning and lighting around O'Brien. The seventh illustration occurs in the rented room above the antique shop. Winston reads from the book in bed as Julia rests beside him. Here the aged and dusty look of the interior is perfect, especially up at the faded wallpaper, and yet again the artist has included all the right objects. The picture of St. Clement's Church in its rosewood frame, and the paperweight, which serves as an important symbol in this section of the novel, and which draws our attention with that colorful pink coral at its core. That leads nicely to the next piece, which is set in the same location. The smashed paperweight and picture are at Winston's feet as he stands off camera with his hands above his head. Julia is carried out by solid men in black uniforms. Her face is upside down, yellow and contorted, and her eyes are closed. A smear of rouge is still visible on either cheek. I like the heartless look of the goon, but another nitpick here. In the text, Winston sees all of this from the floor, as he's been knocked down by the other guards. He'd had his hands up behind his head before this precise moment, but in my mind it didn't go down quite like this. The horror continues in this penultimate piece, as O'Brien brings Winston before a threefold mirror so that he can see the condition of his body. His discarded clothing is in the foreground as Winston gazes in fright at the gray skeleton-like thing that his body's become. The barrel of his ribs, the curve of his spine, the sores on his leg, the ancient appearance, even the thighs being thinner than the knees, they all indicate a careful fidelity to the textual details. My favorite touch here is how O'Brien's glasses are just a reflection in the mirror. It dehumanizes him at this moment. He calls Winston the last man, and he forces this vision on Winston to break his impression that he's somehow the guardian of the human spirit. The final image is from the final chapter, as Winston sits in the cafe waiting to hear about the war effort. He's in his blue party coveralls with stooped shoulders, looking older from his recent ordeals. He's at his corner table and tries to work out a chess problem as he drinks gin flavored with cloves. Almost unconsciously, with his finger in the dust, he traces 2 + 2 =, and we know the answer. And behind him, always watching him, is Big Brother. This is the same image from the cover, and cleverly works to suggest that the face, and especially those eyes, have always been watching, from the beginning all the way to the end of the novel. So which one is better? When it comes to the cover image, I personally like the 2001 design. The juxtaposition of artistic styles works well, and I appreciate eyes as a metaphor for the paranoia and surveillance society over a straight depiction of Big Brother. However, I like the 2014 binding better. The cloth cover feels more premium than the plasticized paper, and the slightly larger trim size helps here too. When it comes to the printing of the text block, I prefer the single release of the 2001 edition. It's larger and easier on the eyes, and the Caxton wove paper seems to be a warmer white than the Abbey wove, which is my preference over a more sterile white when it comes to readability. From that point on, though, it's all about the newer 2014 edition. It actually has an original introduction, and while I typically prefer grittier artwork in a book like this, rather than the slightly cartoon style Burton provides here, I can't deny the exceptional attention to the textual detail which is evident in these illustrations, but isn't present in the older version. And finally, when it comes to the overall design, it's the 2014 edition by a landslide. From the slipcase to the spine to the chapter headings, the design here is really cohesive. On the secondary market, the 2001 edition can often be acquired for half the price of the 2014 edition, but I do think that overall the 2014 edition offers twice the value. If you're on the hunt for your own copy of Folio's 1984, I hope I've provided some useful information here. And there is one more edition of 1984 that I should probably take a look at in the future. Even though I'm privileged enough to have the 2024 limited edition, I'll probably also eventually get that recently announced standard version too. Because for some reason, I just can't help adding more copies of this particular novel to my bookshelf. As always, thanks for watching, and keep an eye out for future videos. When it comes to the stories you love, it's always worth upgrading your books.